Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Ascension, The Devil's Diva reaches a turning point in her life with this powerful E-Steam series story. Get E-Steam Ascension at online booksellers today. As I was watching Morella Reborn's video talking about skin in the goth subculture, she proposed the question, why don't we see images of black goths in mainstream media? And this is a question I can answer because I've been studying the entertainment business for over 25 years, and I've done research on the goth subculture for the last 3 to 5 years as I was writing the Spinsterella trilogy. And from my research, I've learned one thing that I've turned into a simple phrase that will answer all the questions regarding black goths and the images of black goths in mainstream media. And that phrase is this: those who control the money control the media, and those who control the media control the narrative. And what that means is those who control the money in the media control the narrative and tell the story that they want to see regarding black people. And the story that people want to see regarding black people usually is not one that relates to the goth subculture. The people who control the media, the white people and the white liberals who control the media, they want to see a certain story as related to the black image and the black experience. And the story that they want to see presented to them presents old stereotypes that people have been seeing for the last 100 or so years repackaged. And usually these stereotypes these days usually feature the streets, the hood, and the whole image of the thugged out black person, or the whole image of the strong, independent black woman who was a perpetual victim of the thug or the street guy. And these are the images usually most white liberals in Hollywood and most white people in Hollywood are comfortable with regarding the black image and the black experience. These are the stories that they want to see told about black people, and this is why we don't see images of black goths and the black goth subculture, because when it comes down to images of black people doing things like collecting comics, being into science fiction and fantasy, or being a part of the goth subculture, what that does is it humanizes black people and it makes them the same as white people. And this is something many of the white supremacists in media don't want you to see, because if you start seeing black people as human, then you start to connect with them and see them just as yourself. And this is why they don't want to show you images of black goths in mainstream media. Now, when it comes down to black media is also just as complicit as your mainstream white media as it relates to the black image and the image of black people, because they have also made efforts to suppress the image of black people who do things like collect comics or into science fiction and fantasy, or are a part of the goth subculture. They don't want to focus on those black people who are a part of the goth subculture because it, again, does not fit the narrative of many of these white liberals and these white people who control the media, and it doesn't tell the story that they want to hear. And what they want to do is gain the approval of these white people, and because they want to gain their approval, what they do is they suppress all other images and all other stories in the media, so that all the stories that come out of the media only fit the singular narrative and tell the story that the white people and the white liberals want to hear about black people. And this is why we do not see images of black goths in mainstream media, nor do we see them in black media, because they want to tell the story that makes white people feel comfortable, and they want to get the attention and approval of white people, so they tell the story that they want to hear about black people in black magazines, black television shows, black radio, and black film, because they want to tell that story because it makes white people feel comfortable about black people, and it makes white people feel safe about black people and the black image. That's why they primarily focus on these kind of stories because it makes white people feel really comfortable. Now, the whole concept of an African American goth, that's something that most white people are uncomfortable with, and most black people have never heard of and understood. When I would do videos about black goths, many of the people who were part of my audience, some of them said this is the first time they have ever even heard of this concept. Now, I'm familiar with this concept because I've been a part of the comic book, sci-fi, and fantasy world for many, many years. So I've seen Black Goths. I know that they have existed for decades, and I know that they're a major part of the whole comic book world. I would see them at Comic Cons and comic book stores, so I know that blacks have been a part of the goth subculture for years, but the mainstream media doesn't want to focus on it and they don't want to tell stories about it because they don't want to upset people in the black media circles or the white mainstream media because they make their money by selling the image and the narrative that makes white liberals and white people comfortable. The whole image of a black goth that refutes many of the stories and the narratives that they're trying to tell, and it dispels many of the stereotypes that they're trying to present about black people because seeing a black goth humanizes that black person and puts them on the same level as a white person, and that makes them very uncomfortable to see that image of a black goth. That's a human being, and it makes us see that black people are human and that they have the same interests as white people and they are just like everybody else in the world. And that's something that mainstream media just doesn't want to present regarding the black image. When it comes down to the black image, they want to try to present these old stereotypes or stereotypes that make people feel comfortable because if you present an image of a black person as less than, then people will feel like they can be better in society because a lot of people like the whole idea of black people being at the bottom. It's a racist concept, but it's something that many people live with all the time. They live with the whole idea of if this black person is at the bottom of the world, then I can feel better about myself in society. So they don't like the idea of seeing a black person on the same level as they are. And as it relates to the goth subculture, they don't like the idea, again, of seeing that black goth because it makes them human, because that means that that black goth is on the same level of that white person and they're participating in this alternative lifestyle, then it means that they're just as human as everyone else. Now, when it comes down to the black goth subculture, and getting the word out about the black goth subculture, that's something that black people have to do. Those of us who know about the black goth subculture, we have to make efforts to try to share more information about it and tell more people about it. That was one of the reasons why I wrote Spinsterella back in 2015 and published it because I wanted people to know that there were black people who were a part of the goth subculture. There have been black people who have enjoyed being a part of the goth subculture for over the last 40 years since the inception. And I wanted people to understand, that there's a whole bunch of black people who have been enjoying the darker side of life for many years. And as I started to learn more and more about the goth subculture, specifically, that was one of the reasons why I wrote Spellbound in 2016 because I wanted people to understand why someone would want to become a part of the goth subculture and why they would identify with it and why someone would how somebody would start out in the goth subculture because I wanted people to see how the Matilda Crowley character became a part of the goth subculture, what were her reasons for becoming a part of it, what made her motivated to be a part of it, and what were her reasons for becoming a part of the goth subculture. So that whole story was about her baby bat years and her beginnings in the goth subculture. And then after that, I decided to write Legendary Mad Matilda so people could see the Matilda Crowley character's growth as she transitioned from one part of the goth scene, which was the club scene and the rave scene, over to corporate America, and show how somebody grows in the goth subculture. Because a lot of people, they just think goth is something that teenagers do, and that's another generalization that a lot of black people have about goth. A lot of people think, oh, goth is something that a person does in their teen years, and then if they grow out of it, they don't understand that some people have been a part of the goth subculture for 5, 10, 15, 20, even 35, 40 years, and they've been there for years, and this has just become their lifestyle. And I wanted to show how this character didn't just be a goth. This became her lifestyle over 20 some odd years, and that's what I wanted to show with the whole three of the books in the Spinsterella trilogy. I wanted to show in Spellbound how she came into the scene, and in Legendary Mad Matilda how she grew in the subculture and how she made the subculture a part of her life as she was starting her career and transitioning from the club scene to corporate America. And then I show in Spinsterella the 40-year-old Matilda growing older in the goth scene later on in her life. And all three of the books give you a comprehensive picture of an African American in the goth subculture, and they give you some insight into the goth subculture and show you how African Americans are a part of it and show you a picture of the African American goth subculture. And the reason why I wrote those books is because I wanted people to really gain an understanding of African Americans and how diverse African American culture is, because as it relates to African American culture, mainstream media isn't going to tell certain stories because those stories just don't fit their narrative, and they don't fit the narrative that white people want to see as related to black people. And because those black people get their money from those white people, that's why we don't see those stories told. I take my own money and I tell those stories because I believe that telling stories about African American Goths is important because it allows us to diversify the image of African Americans in media, and it allows us to see different aspects of black life, different aspects of black culture, and it allows us to get a broader picture of African Americans and the experience of African Americans here in America. Now, response to the whole Spinsterella trilogy has been incredibly positive, and most African American Goths have really come out of their way to help me get this book out and help me get the word out about this book. I remember when I published Spinsterella in 2015, it was Black Goths who went out of their way to help promote the book on their Tumblrs and their blogs because they understood how important the book was in helping to get the word out about blacks in the goth subculture and presenting an image of blacks in the goth subculture, something that is not talked about in magazines like Essence or Ebony or in other mainstream media, like other black media, like these online sites like Madame Noir or Rolling Out. They don't talk about blacks in the goth subculture, and it's something that really, as I saw it, needed to be talked about, and that's why I go out of my way to make videos and blogs and go out here and publish books like the Spinsterella trilogy because I want to tell the story of African Americans in the goth subculture, and I'd love to go back and tell more stories about blacks in the goth subculture, and I'm still working on plans to write more books about blacks in the goth subculture because I've always made efforts to incorporate goth characters or goth themes in many of my other books, like with the Colleen character from the Theta. She was one of the black goth characters I did, and in other books like Night of the Vampires, I had a goth character, and in the Temptation of it's the Temptation of John Haynes. I had these goth themes and dark themes all throughout the book. So this is something that I know about. This is something that I've learned about over the years, and it's something I try to incorporate in my work quite a bit. And I really want more people to learn about African Americans in the goth subculture because the only way that people will know about it is if we tell the story ourselves, because those who control the money and the media don't want to tell those stories. So I have to come out of my way and come out and tell those stories myself, because if you get the stories straight from the source, that means that they're coming from someone who cares about it and wants to present it in the way that presents it in a balanced perspective, because that's the way, from a balanced perspective, we can see black people in the goth subculture as people and not some stereotype that mainstream media would present of black people. If you want to read the Spinsterella trilogy, you can do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.